Presentation of dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
Have budget cuts in the correction department jeopardized public safety? As the legislature begins another round of reductions, we'll look at the challenges facing this state agency. Call in with your questions. Dialogue is next. And thank you for joining us here on Idaho Public Television, on the World Wide Web, and on public radio stations.
Last December, the head of Idaho's Correctional Department sent up a red flag in the form of an op-ed. In it, he cited legislative auditors' warnings that the state's prisons were dangerously understaffed, that his agency was seeing a 24% turnover in the ranks of its correctional officers. Correction employees took more than 78,000 furlough hours in the last fiscal year and reduced their ranks by more than 100 positions. But despite the budget squeeze, the agency had some successes, noted by Governor Otter in his State of the State speech.
At the Department of Corrections, Director Brent Renke and Olivia Craven of the Parole Commission have improved offender assessment and placement that are making better use of retained jurisdiction programs. That's saving $32 million in holding our inmate population more than 1,500 below our earlier projections.
In the next fiscal year, Otter proposes increasing the Correction Department budget by 5.5%, one of the few state agencies to get a bump up.
But is it enough? And what about the other issues facing the department, like the problems at the state's privately run prison? Joining me now to discuss the status of the Department of Correction is its Director, Brent Renke, and Chief of Operations, Kevin Kemp. Thank you so much for you both being here.
I appreciate it.
And of course, we want to hear from you to join the conversation. Give us a call toll free at 1-800-973-9800. So let's talk about public safety. With a dangerously understaffed is a very scary phrase. Are our prisons unsafe? Is there a possible problem in our public safety system?
Joan, there's a lot that goes into, and there was a lot when we were thinking about, or I was thinking about how we were going to craft that particular statement. And you have to understand what we did last fiscal year, to try to wrap up the year with as much savings as we possibly could to help the overall state budget. When you take a look at the fact that we held a large number of positions open toward the end of the fiscal year, and of course the state fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. We held a lot of positions open. I think that at one point in the last week of the last month of the fiscal year, we had some 87 positions open. We did that intentionally to acquire some salary savings to help, just in case something did occur that we didn't realize from a financial standpoint on a statewide basis. When you take those kinds of numbers, and then you take a look at the deployment of the 116th, we have a lot of active personnel that are currently serving overseas. We have long-term sickness in some staff. We've got overtime, comp time, vacation time, sick time, and you put furloughs on top of that. It's very difficult to manage. And the intent of that particular article was to speak to our staff and their families, how much we value them, the fact that there are successes even in difficult times. Our facilities are safe. We make the right decisions every day in our facilities across the state. When the Office of Performance Evaluators did their work, they found that we're short in some key areas. And we've known that for quite some time. But we make good choices every day, and we make sure that every safety position within our facilities are staffed every shift.
Well, how do you keep a staff going when you have that much furlough time? That's a reduction in their salary, but they also have the problem of trying to make up time for someone who's taking furlough time off. So they get overtime. They get so much overtime they can't even take their overtime because they still need to work. How do you maintain a staff under those circumstances?
Well, fortunately for us, our staff who come to us don't come with the expectation of getting rich. They come with their hearts in the right place, like all law enforcement agencies across the state. They want to do the right thing. They want to live by a mission and a creed of protecting the public. And so I think for the vast majority of our staff, they're in it for the long haul. They're in it for the good times, for the bad times, for the difficult times. But I would agree with 100% with Director Renke. Our prisons are safe. As a matter of fact, they're amongst the safest prisons in the country.
Well, it costs you about, what, $15,000 to train someone new somewhere around in there? That can't be, that's not cheap.
Well, but when we have a new CO, especially since we were thinking about corrections officers at that point, and our turnover rate largely is in the corrections area, mainly because that's our largest division, our largest work center within
Right.
this department. We have 10 prisons across the state. 8 are publicly operated, 2 are privately operated. So when we go out to recruit, as we had to, and we recruited very heavily toward the end of the fiscal year, and we actually ran extra academies, worked very closely with our contractors to be able to get our staffing levels back up, because we acquired some 6,000 hours of overtime in that period trying to get those positions filled again. That led to a lot of burnout. It led to a lot of frustration. But when we bring new COs online, in about the first 10 to 12 weeks, we will spend between $14,000 and $15,000. So when we're looking at a projected turnover rate of 24 to 25%, that gives us pause to concern. Chief Kemp's going to be looking very closely at ways that we can engage our wardens, our deputy wardens, our lieutenants, all the way down to those COs to really take another look and try to hang on to that staff and make sure that they may understand what they're doing and why they're there, but we won't want their hearts to be engaged as well, because they're a part of something much larger than they are. And that's why people are attracted to correction. It's
Every state agency can probably,
Yeah.
and a lot of private companies can complain of the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Not enough pay, too many overtime hours that you can't take off because
Mm-hmm.
someone's got to do the job. But these are your prisons.
Mm-hmm.
What do legislators tell you when you walk and say, these are the stats, this is what we're dealing with, and this is where we are?
Chief?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll answer it the same way I answered it a few weeks ago when talking to one of my colleagues in another state. We are so fortunate to live in the state of Idaho. Frankly, we have a lot of support, 100% support from our governor's office, from our legislature. We truly feel like we're partners with them.
We have 100% support, you don't have 100% funding.
Well, we have the funding necessary to keep Idaho prisons safe, Idaho public safe, and it's just not just talk. Our statistics and history demonstrates that.
Let me change subject, John, since we talked about this. It was not all bad news. Prison numbers were actually down. Why were your numbers down?
Actually,
That was good news. It saved money.
It's very good news, and that was the heart of what we were trying to say in that particular statement. But our numbers are down because we started looking at ways within the Department of Corrections some 5 or 6 years ago. I've had the privilege of being here for 4 years, but several years before that, we started looking at programming, making an investment in individuals, in people that we have incarcerated, so that they can be more successful upon release. We really started seeing the benefit of working not only as a department but as a criminal justice system, working with the courts very closely, the Parole Commission, the Office of Drug Policy, the Department of Health and Welfare, and trying to find ways to be able to leverage their resources and our resources to have better outcomes. Fiscal year 8, we had no growth. 9, we had no growth. With the budget cuts and the loss of many community programs, we saw a 3% growth last year in 10. And we're projected for about a 3% growth this year. But I think we found that element to help balance the system. We have been able to slow down, as the governor mentioned on Monday, and I want to thank him for his comments. As he said, we've now realized a $32 million cost avoidance. That's $32 million we don't have to argue for. Those are $32 million that helps our state. And that's a reward for our staff, and it's a reward for a job well done.
So this is the part of the retained
Yes.
jurisdiction. Now I'm going to have you define retained jurisdiction before we talk about it.
Okay. Well, what a retained jurisdiction person is someone that actually stays within the jurisdiction of the courts. And so they don't take that full step into our prison system to where they fall into the Parole Commission. And so they'll go in, they'll spend a certain amount of time within one of our programs in our institutions. If that inmate's successful in going through that program, they'll get kicked back in front of that judge, and that judge will ultimately make the decision whether they go to probation or relinquish and go back to prison.
Okay, well, let's get to our first phone caller. Ryan in Idaho Falls. Ryan, go ahead.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. Go ahead.
Hey, yeah, I just was currently in prison. I was doing a rider as well as a parole violator. When I went to the parole commission, they didn't even recognize my retained jurisdiction. The parole commission was pretty much unaware of what the retained jurisdiction entailed.
Okay. Well, let me ask about that. Thank you, Ryan, for your call.
Respond to that?
Go ahead. Now, I think we should probably explain, and for viewers who may not know, the basically the correction department takes people in and takes to the parole commission. The parole commission is the agency that decides who gets out and when they get out.
Right. I think it's important to note that the courts are the front door and the parole commission is the back door. We take care of everything that's in the middle. And that's an important component. But I think Chief Kemp can do a very good job of answering this caller's question.
Well, thank you, Ryan, for the call, first off. And Joan, you know, it's difficult to answer, obviously, because you don't have Ryan's full case and background and things like that. What I can tell you, though, is that we work very closely with Director Craven and the Parole Commission. Again, not just talk, but I think their practices speak for themselves as it relates to public safety, making the right decisions and choices on who gets parole and who doesn't. And so without really knowing too much of Ryan's background, it's difficult for me to really talk to or speak to.
Now, both the Department of Correction and the Probation or the Parole Commission came under scrutiny this past year from a legislative study that showed problems within the two institutions, or at least in the relation how those came out. Now, most of the focus was on the Parole Commission. How, on your side of the fence, in that middle area where you're talking, how have you changed things in the last year to try to make the system smoother so that people aren't spending a lot of time beyond their parole?
That's a great question, because in the last several years we've initiated what we call treatment pathways, and every inmate that we have in custody is now on a pathway based on their assessed need and assessed risk. And so when we have an individual on a pathway, we do everything we can to make sure they're in the right bed at the right time, so that when they have the opportunity to stand before the Parole Commission, they've met all the requirements of that commission to attain release. So we've got great things are happening in that area, and Chief Kemp's done a very good job of working with the courts and again with Director Craven on developing a violation matrix. That's been a tremendous help as well, as far as a tool to be able to help keep our population down.
Have you seen some changes since the legislative office performance review came out?
Yeah, I would say that we have. You know, I think we, and in this case, the Parole Commission, I think embraced what was talked about in that report. There's certainly some things, I think, in all departments where improvements can be made. You know, one of the things that we were able to do is a gentleman by the name of Josh Tewalt, who's in the governor's office. He and I were able to go spend a couple days in the state of Michigan about 2 years ago. And we were able to go and evaluate what they were doing to reduce recidivism at the same time of keeping their public safety expectations at a high level. Well, we came back and adopted some of those practices, and that violation matrix is one of them. And what that simply does is just we use best practices and research to determine who should be getting sent back to prison and who should maybe be deferred into a community-like program. And once we put that in place, we've seen some excellent results.
I think it's important too, Joan, that we've taken the recommendations of the Office of Performance Evaluations, their audit, we've taken it very seriously. And we've taken great steps from a procedural standpoint, from a standard operating procedure standpoint, to implement those recommendations. Because they did make some very solid and some very sound recommendations, and we're seeing some good outcomes from that point.
I'm going to jump topic on you again to the Idaho Corrections Center, which is run by a private company, the Corporation Correction of America. That prison has earned the nickname in the news that says as the Gladiator School for the amount of inmate-on-inmate violence, and there's an FBI investigation currently going on to that. How much does that concern you, and should we change the contract with CCA and how it runs the prison?
Okay, if I might, the managing company is the Corrections Corporation of America out of Tennessee.
Right.
And we have worked with that particular corporation now. We're in our 11th year of working with them. We've just started that 11th year, just past the 10th anniversary. We are always concerned with violence, and we're concerned about the safety of staff in all of our 10 prisons, and we're very concerned about our inmates, what's happening, the culture within our facilities. As you can well imagine, with the litigation that we're looking at, we can't go into a lot of detail about that particular series of articles that are out there, but I can tell you that we are working very closely with Mr. Tim Wangler. He is our new warden as of March of this last year. He's a good professional. He's got a good correctional mind, good correctional practices that we're working with him on implementing. We have increased our monitoring staff in that particular prison. The monitors are there monitoring and auditing and working on contracts and day-to-day operations, and their standard operating procedures are our standard operating procedures. So we're working on helping to get those implemented. We are seeing some improvements in that area.
How did it get to
day
that
in
point?
And day out. There's a lot to that story, and again, I can't go into a lot of detail. We can talk a lot about since last February, but prior to last February, we need to be very careful because of litigation. I'm sure you understand.
I do. Do you think there'll be? I'll have to give it one more try. Is there going to be a change in that contract with that?
You know, we are looking at that contract on a week in and week out basis, and that's why we've enhanced our monitors. We're working very closely with the governor's office, working very closely with purchasing. In the state of Idaho, the Department of Purchasing actually owns that contract. We're responsible for how and what goes into that contract. And so our monitors are continually working to improve our process. We are seeing some good things come out of the facility. We've got a long ways to go, but we're well on our way.
About 85% of if my numbers are correct, of the people who go into prison have some sort of drug or alcohol dependency issue. How stands treatment in our prisons?
Well,
Both the private and the
Sure.
public.
Well, I think we're a state that believes in using best practices, research, and treatment-related programs. And I think in large part because of that, because we've committed as a state to those types of things, we benefit from one of the lowest recidivism rates in the country. It hovers right around 37%. That's outstanding. Because Joan, you'll know, and I think a lot of our viewers will know, that the vast majority of inmates are coming out of our prisons. That's just a simple fact. They are coming out. And you know, a little example I gave not too long ago is I was talking to a friend of mine whose wife is an avid jogger on the Greenbelt, and I was getting ribbed a little bit about you know, about what about these programs, what about this treatment? How come you just don't make those inmates make big rocks out of smaller rocks and vice versa? And I explained to him, I said, well, let me explain two different types of inmates, and you tell me which one you want your wife to face in the Greenbelt tonight. Inmate A comes into our prison system. All they want to do is get more tattoos, sunbathe, and sit on a bed every single day. Okay, and they do that for 5 or 6 years and then get out. Inmate B comes into our facility and we do something with him. We put that inmate in a treatment bed. We try to change the way he thinks. We give him some education, we give him some job skills, and then we do a structured reentry back into the community, all with supervision, all coming out on with a parole officer. Now, you tell me, which inmate would you like your wife to face on that Greenbelt tonight at 6 p.m.?
Because eventually they will.
They're coming out.
They come eventually.
98% do.
Let's go to Leaf in Rexburg. Leaf, go ahead. Leaf, there in Rexburg. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead.
Yes, Director Renke, I was just curious with regards to, I believe there's some proposed cutbacks in mental health services in the community, and I was wondering if that's going to affect commitments to the department and how you might handle that.
So let me repeat that question, make sure we've got it right, Leif, that you're concerned about how cutbacks to mental health services are going to
Yes.
affect the correction department
Yes.
and the services provided there. So how are our mental health services going to affect the department?
Leif, that's a great question. We have established in the last several years behavioral health units at one of our main yard in South Boise at ISCI. That's a facility that focuses on, it's a housing unit within the prison that really focuses on mental health needs. We also have a behavioral health unit at PWCC in Pocatello for our female population. And we've done a very good job of working from an education and treatment standpoint of protecting those mental health services within the Department of Corrections.
Do you have a concern that as mental health services are cut to the outside population, that we're going to start seeing issues from that, as we unfortunately saw in Tucson this week, that there's when mental health issues aren't being addressed in a community, that tragic things can occur? Do you have some concerns about that?
We do. There's no question about that, and that's as I mentioned a few moments ago, when we start looking at the 3% projected increase in our population, a lot of that is because the fact that we're losing some community-based resources around the state of Idaho. And I think it's going to be very important as we work very closely with the Department of Health and Welfare, and a group that I think we've been working very closely with the Governor's Office on, was from a transformational standpoint, looking at mental health services and the delivery of services locally, that we continue to move forward, even in these difficult times. Services need to be provided as needed at the community level, and we've identified that. We're definitely looking for funding sources, and that will help us, because 14,000 of the people that we manage are within the community under probation and parole. In the state of Idaho, Joan, we manage 1 out of every 34 adult men and 1 out of every 156 adult women. So we are very concerned about community resources in the form of substance abuse and mental health services, so that we can offer services within our prisons as well as within our probation and parole offices throughout the state of Idaho. We work very closely with our sister agencies to try to fill that gap as well.
As part of the budget crisis, I understand there's some fee increases coming. Let me read. This was an interesting list, so let me find my notes here. So there was going to be an increased fee for the probation pre-sentence investigation, an increased fee for the incarceration fee. I get that. The cost of supervision, application fee for visitors who need their security clearance, increased costs for using video visiting services. So how much does it really cost to go to jail these days?
Joan, that's a great question. And some of these fees exist and some don't. There are two of these that will require legislation. The pre-sentence investigation proposed fee, we did 4,800, probably 4,800, 4,850 pre-sentence investigations last year at a cost of about $2.2 million. And one of the things we're looking at and we're proposing is a $100 fee for a pre-sentence investigation to help offset some of those expenses. It's a correctional user fee is what it would be. It doesn't exist, and what we're looking at, knowing that we're going to be facing some budget cuts, or we're looking at things a little bit differently. In addition to that,
although I can't imagine this population has a lot of money.
That's true, and that's why we know that there's going to be at least 25% of our population that's not going to be able to pay, or we will have to make some adjustments what they do pay. The cost of supervision fee is currently $50. We're going to be proposing that be raised.
$50 a day or
a month?
A month.
A month.
Okay.
Excuse me. $50 a month. We're looking at I proposed there of an additional $10. The visitor application fee, last year we did 13,500 backgrounds on potential visitors, something that takes anywhere from 15 to 40 minutes per background investigation. We're going to be looking at a $10 request there. These are ideas that we're bringing forward. It's kind of a user-based approach, a correctional user-based. The video visitation, we don't have that currently. And so it's something that would help us on multiple levels within our agency. So when we start talking about these opportunities, there's a couple of others that I think are kind of interesting too. And one is central purchasing, another one is fleet management. We're trying to do a much better job as a department with the resources that we're entrusted with. So we're looking high and low and everything in between to make every dollar stretch as far as we can, and yet in that process, we're trying to buy better and use the resource better in that process.
Now we have a couple of phone callers on hold, Peter and Glenn, and we'll get to you when we go to the flip side on our Web Extra. So Peter and Glenn, stay with us on the phone and we'll catch your question on our Web Extra. We've only got a few minutes left. I want to give you each a chance to take a more philosophical question. What do you see prison and the correction system looking like in 5 years or 10 years?
Yeah, well, that's
What are we going to have in the future?
that's a great question.
It is a great question.
I think the director and I are laughing a little bit because we've talked about this several times just in the past couple weeks. What is corrections going to look like in 5 or 10 or 15 years? And I think one word that would sum it up would be innovative. I mean, we are going to use things like technology to increase our practices, increase what sits atop our mission statement, which is public safety. And so I think we need to continue to move as our country moves to be innovative and not stagnant and looking at constantly doing things just the way we've always done them. We want to be innovative and be able to be fast and move quickly when things need to be put into effect that, again, are going to protect the public.
John, I think when you take a look at what we talked, you started the program today talking about several successes, and when we looked at our future back in 2008, we saw the projected at that point by experts in the correctional field outside of Idaho that came in and looked at our system. They projected that we would have over 9,000 inmates by this time, 2011. What the governor mentioned on Monday in cost avoidance of $32 million, that was that 9,000 number. That was that extra 1,500 inmates that we would have in state's custody. What we've been able to accomplish in that time period, that cost avoidance, some people will say, well, that's funny money, Brent. You never had that money.
Yeah.
You never had that money to begin with, so you can't. But I'm telling you, if we were sitting here tonight and we had that 9,000 inmates in custody, that wouldn't be very funny.
No.
It would be very, very serious, and it would put us in a much more difficult situation than where we are. I think when we start looking at corrections in the future, we need to keep doing what we've been doing the last 4 or 5 years. Every time we find an opportunity to reset, when we find an inefficient area, we try to reset it. Not only within our department, but with working with all of our partners in the criminal justice system. What we've done, what the legislators and the governor's office have done to support problem-solving courts has been phenomenal. We're seeing some great things in that area. The relationship we've fostered with the Parole Commission has been outstanding. We need to take that and raise it to the next level, and then to the next level, because we can do better. We always can. It isn't about building more prisons. There's definitely a replacement factor in what we need to be working on, because our prisons are wearing out. There's no question about that. But as we look to the future, as the chief has said, we need to be as innovative and as forward-thinking as we possibly can.
All right, gentlemen, we've run out of time. Thank you very much. Again, to our callers who are with us on the phone, stay with us. We'll catch you on the flip side when we do our web extra. Again, thank you both for being here. I appreciate you. And if you want to learn more about Idaho's Correction Department, we have lots of information for you on our website. Check it out. Go to idahoptv.org and click on Dialogue. For more legislative news, be sure to tune in to Idaho Reports. It airs Friday nights at 8 p.m., repeats Sunday at 11:30 a.m. Mountain, 10 p.m. Pacific on our main channel. And also check out legislature live coverage anytime at idahoptv.org. Thanks for tuning in, and join us here next time for Dialogue.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho. To order a copy of this program from Idaho Public Television, call our toll-free number or visit us on the World Wide Web